Welcome to Life Unrestricted.
This is your show if you're sick of living a life controlled by food and exercise rules, and if you're ready to learn how to accept yourself and enjoy the heck out of life. My gig is about body image, femininity, self-worth, and resilience. Come on, let's walk side by side as we slowly step out of restriction misery and unlock our true selves.
Your host, Merritt Boxler, is a former national radio DJ, freelance journalist, speaker, and writer with a passion to make women feel good in their bodies. This is a show brought to you live from Switzerland.
Buenos dias, lovely radicals. How's your week been? Are you feeling fine? And in case you weren't already, I got something to make you feel fine, by the way. Want to hear it? You're a badass. Yep, there, I said it. Oh wait, is that your gremlin yelling from way in the back? Something about me just being an ingratiating, phony podcaster who's full of shit? Yeah, I get it. I'd have a similar reaction. But you know what? That party pooper is not going to rain on my parade today, and especially not on yours. So let me take my sweet time to make your gremlins sit down and give you a chance to actually believe me when I say that you're a badass. And just so that I don't clog up this intro too much and let you get to my conversation with my also very badass guest today, I'll make this a two-parter. Part 1 of why you're a badass today, and part 2 next week. So first off, when I say that you're a badass, I'm not saying you're perfect. That would make me an ingratiating, phony podcaster who's full of shit, because none of us is perfect. So let me talk about perfection and the illusion thereof for a minute. Because some of you might say, but what about this YouTube personality that looks so perfect? Or what about the coworker that always looks so put together? Well, could it be that we often fall into the trap of comparing our bloopers to other people's showreel? Right? Don't we? And also, on a more psychological level, what does other people's performance of superiority really tell us? I think it tells us that all they know how to do to protect their vulnerability is to hide behind the veneer of constructed perfection. Because vulnerability means being authentic, risking rejection, showing up real. So when I see those seemingly perfect people, what I see is a deeply insecure human being, afraid of being rejected. Someone who obviously thinks that unless they perform perfection, they would be found out as unworthy or not lovable. I think it's fear that drives the need to always do things perfectly, a fear that comes from some or multiple experiences of having been rejected, which leads a person to sacrifice their own voice eventually, their true, imperfect, natural self. This fear of being found out is what leads people to pay this incredibly high price of performing perfection. Not only is it completely exhausting to live behind this mask of perfection, but it also leaves zero room for playful exploration. I cannot tell you how many times I didn't try out new things, didn't go places, or didn't accept challenges simply because I didn't believe in myself enough. I thought I have to do this perfectly or else. So I was paralyzed by the fear of failing and looking like a fool. On top of that, the death grip of perfection is also incredibly disconnecting and isolating. To be admired for a display of an artificial self is a very lonely place to be. I know that place well. All the years when I was admired for my job success, my diet success, my display of independence and take no shit attitude, well, two things happened there. A, I got hooked on the idea that I had to keep chasing outside approval to, quote, be somebody. And B, the harder I tried, the more I lost myself. And the more I lost myself, the more dependent I became on outside approval. And the more approval I got, the more afraid I was to let go of this exhausting performance, because that felt like the most threatening thing to my existence. So you see, that vicious perfectionism cycle sent me spiraling down into a real deep sense of loneliness inside, a place of being convinced that I could never be loved for who I was, and an ever-present fear of being found out somehow, and basically no idea who I really was. But what the outside world was seeing was someone who was incredibly put together. And that obviously backfired badly, or else I wouldn't be doing this podcast today and talking about all of that, right? Because the outside praise only reinforced my belief that I was way too flawed a human being. Honestly, I just felt like a mistake on the inside. And I'm so happy that I learned my lesson, even if it took breaking down. Because after that, I started opening up, and by opening up, I met others who were willing to open up. And I found out the most relieving truth of them all. We are all deeply, wonderfully flawed. And we're all scared shitless that we're not good enough. And I believe it's also exactly that which makes us able to connect and be able to relate to each other, to our basic humanness. And isn't it only from there, this place of connection and realness, that all sorts of personal growth becomes possible? Well, I think so, because there certainly is no real possibility of growth when we stay hidden behind the perceived safety veil of perfection. So that's my take on our futile pursuit of inexistent perfection. And I hope this little foreplay made you somewhat willing to listen to my suggestion that you're a badass. And as far as I can hear from here, your gremlin is not yelling anymore. That's pretty awesome. So look, why I think you are a badass is because you're being here right now with all of us. You're being courageous enough to question some old beliefs about beauty ideals and perfection that are, quite frankly, not serving anyone at all. So you being open for a message that is so starkly different from what the media, the advertisement industry, and our diet-infested society barks at you every day makes you a badass. Don't you agree? Look, you and I, we are constantly bombarded with the sort of body rhetoric that triggers our deepest fears and insecurities and makes us fall for all sorts of rule-based, restriction-based, perfection-based, comparison-based, or playing small-based living. We're constantly being fed, subtly or more often rather punch in the gut-like, that our happiness is size-dependent and that healthy has a predetermined look, and that the solution to all of our problems is weight loss. So you're a badass simply because you are now aware of this fear-mongering going on, and you're seeing that our society keeps reinforcing that fear-mongering, and that it's not just ridiculous, but that there's also no legit scientific evidence for weight being the source of all our problems. And you also see that it's a highly profitable scheme for the one industry that keeps failing 97% of all their customers, yet it comes up daily with newly packaged promises of happiness and desirability in the form of new programs, pills, and fancy memberships, the weight loss industry. And to finish part 1 of me trying to convince you that you're a badass, I'll just say this. Sometimes I get angry at myself for not just deleting my old programming and get the hell on with it. But then where's the compassion? Out the window. Because really, isn't it not surprising that we believed those thin commandments for so long? After all, it was one of the basic narratives that was being programmed onto our hard drives. Back when we didn't really have a say in the matter. Magazines, movies, pictures of beauty ideals, dieting relatives, comments everywhere. Well, it was pretty much the air that we breathed. And now, after all these years of breathing that stale, stinky air without being aware of it, we're getting an idea that there's an entirely different breathing experience out there. Actual clean, fresh air. Freedom! It's a scary idea to leave the stale, stinky air behind, I know. But being open to the idea is what makes you a courageous badass. There you go. And by the way, if I could, and because I kind of feel like it right now, I would also love to do a little interpretative dance of gratitude right now, because Jessica happened. This woman has decided that this podcast gives her so much that she wants to give something back, and she became the latest member of my Patreon tribe. Jessica, by your financial support, I do not only breathe more freely in terms of keeping up with the podcast costs, but I also feel really acknowledged for what I do. And I'm very grateful for that. I'm grateful that you became a contributor on patreon.com/lifeunrestricted. So my eternal gratitude upon thee, dear Jessica. And for those of you who are on the fence of supporting this show with a pledge, please know that this is a completely no strings attached situation, so you can cancel anytime. Go have a look at things at patreon.com/lifeunrestricted. Thank you. And if you can't or don't want to give something, that's fine. My love is not conditional in that sense. But in any case, I think those who haven't yet discovered the Life Unrestricted podcast will love you if you just wrote a nice review on iTunes. I heard it helps to rank the show higher. And I think we all could use some more stuff about leaving diet culture behind than how to stay stuck in it, right? So to leave a rating and write a review, you have to type in Life Unrestricted to the search bar on your podcast app, whether you're subscribed or not. And then when the result pops up, click on the show image, the large one, and then from there you get a selection of tabs, one of them being ratings and reviews. And there you go. That's how complicated iTunes wants to handle this. Anyway, thank you so much for supporting our mission in whatever way suits you. This week on the Life Unrestricted podcast, I get to talk to Ragen Chastain from Los Angeles. Isn't that awesome? Most of you know Ragen as the author of the fantastic blog Dances with Fat, but she also wrote a book called Fat, the Owner's Manual, and she is the editor of the multi-volume anthology The Politics of Size, Perspectives from the Fat Acceptance Movements. Her blog, Dances with Fat, is followed by thousands of people from every continent around the world, men, women, who are just as fed up with weight stigma as herself and us. Ragen Chastain describes herself as a professional speaker, writer, and real-life fat person. She has spoken everywhere from friends' living rooms to Google headquarters to Caltech and Dartmouth. She will not stop until we live in a world where the full diversity of body sizes is respected and fat people are able to live in fat bodies without shame, stigma, bullying, and harassment. I'm so excited to get to say hi, Ragen.
Hello, Merritt.
Hi, I'm very pleased to welcome you to the Life Unrestricted podcast adventure today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. You do such great work with this podcast. I'm really honored.
Thank you. I'm honored. I've been giddily waiting for today, and I think me and my entire audience can't wait to get to know you. So please, let's go back into your story and let's imagine the two of us playing in a sandbox as 4-year-olds, so like the late 70s or something. What kind of girl would I have gotten to know?
Well, my mom says that I was always exactly how I am now, just smaller. I staged my first protest in kindergarten.
You did?
And yeah, I was upset with the amount of time that we spent playing and napping versus learning. And so I got my class to bang on our desks and chant, "We want to learn."
I love it. I love it.
And yeah, my mom got a report card home that said, Ragen is a good student, but she leads small revolts. And so my mom read this to me and asked me what was going on. And I was like, oh, well, it wasn't a small revolt because I got the whole class and I couldn't get the afternoon kindergarten involved because I don't ever see them. And my poor, now long-suffering mother, then, in the beginning suffering mother, had to explain that the teacher wasn't saying my revolt was too small. Like, that wasn't her criticism of what I had done, was that I didn't get enough kids involved. So I've sort of just always been like this.
Yeah, it's interesting how certain personality traits just have been installed like ever since the beginning. Like
Yeah.
this urge to learn stuff about the world or curiosity. For some people, it's humor or playfulness or, I don't know, some quirks have already been there when I was in my sandbox playing with my little friends, I guess. But I mean, I cannot remember a time when I did not feel self-conscious about my body or in my body. But do you remember, like, when you were 4 years old, did you feel fine in your body, or had someone already instilled this sense of not okayness into you?
I mean, I was always a bigger kid from, the time I was born, basically. But I can't remember getting a lot of flack from it. I mean, I had a little bit of family suggesting that I needed to, try to lose some weight. But basically, I was a good athlete from a pretty early age. And I think that got me out of a lot of the sort of teasing and body bashing, was that I was a successful athlete. And so I didn't really develop a strong sense of self-consciousness or, an idea of wrongness about my body until really almost my senior year of high school. Actually, it was sort of a singular experience. I had my friend's mom, who I feel like she was really well-intentioned, but she said to me, like, towards the end of my junior year, you're going to lose that weight before you go to college, right? And she said, you don't want to go to college fat, do you?
Helpful, thanks.
I know, right? Now I look back and I'm like, why? And it was like, I mean, what they say about eating disorders, sort of that genetics loads the gun and environment pulls the trigger.
And that was the trigger moment?
Yep, that was 100% my experience. I had, previous to that, not thought a lot about dieting. And after that, I thought about very little else. I started eating less and less and exercising more and more. I wound up in the hospital, having collapsed on a treadmill at the gym. And so that sort of was what started. Yeah, it was, and like, I can really only do things in the most dramatic way possible. And so that was, I was running on a treadmill, and then I was not running on a treadmill anymore. And then I was in the hospital. So, but yeah, that was sort of what kicked it all off, was somebody just saying something that they thought was appropriate and a good thing to say, which is why I think that it's so important to attack the root of that culture of talking about other people's bodies at all.
Yes, I will go into this for sure, because, and mark the word well-intentioned when you told the story, because some of those who actively body shame people and shame them into losing weight, they claim to be well-intentioned as well. Even though everything in psychology, everything we've ever learned about the human soul and the human being tells you that shaming someone will never lead to long-term change of the attitude towards yourself. You can shame someone into an instant behavior change out of fear of further shaming, but it will never last. It will always stand on this ground of I'm worthless. And you can't be healthy if you think you're worthless and if you think you don't deserve to be here. That's what I often think when I hear, you hear it everywhere. No matter what kind of podcast I listen to, be it history podcasts or comedy podcasts or whatever, the topic of weight or fat people or dieting, it comes up all the time. And so many times I've heard people say, yeah, we should shame them, as if they didn't feel self-conscious already. I don't understand this kind of thinking. I really don't. Because, whenever I was shamed, no matter what for, really. After that, I felt even more worthless. I tended to isolate more. And by the way, I also tended to eat more, because it seemed to be the only consolation I had. So, I get really fired up about this whole thing about shaming people, no matter why, but it really doesn't help. And I hate that people somehow, they defend their shaming techniques by saying they're well-intentioned.
Yeah. Well, and I think one of the things that really frustrates me that you alluded to is the way that when it comes to fat people, when it comes to the idea of weight loss, when it comes to the idea of how we treat fat people based on what stereotypes we have about their health and behaviors, people seem very comfortable to throw all the research out the window. Like, it just doesn't matter. There's a famous and previously pretty respected ethicist named Daniel Callahan who said, no, we probably should shame fat people, because he was a smoker and he felt that since people shaming smoking had gotten him to quit smoking, that shaming fat people would get them to quit being fat.
But that's not the same thing. I mean, being fat is not a habit.
Right. Every single smoker smokes. Smoking is a single behavior, whereas fat is a body size, and there are fat people who are people of all different sizes for every possible reason, and changing body size is not nearly the same thing as changing a single specific habit. But that's what I'm saying. Like, this is a guy who knows better. And yet, we just get this idea that if it comes to fat people, that one, any thin person with an idea, that idea is as valid as if it were researched through double-blind, perfectly controlled studies, and that any fat person can't be a good witness to their experience because they are fat. And so, they just need to listen to whatever any thin person says they should do to be less fat. As somebody who studied research and statistics and research methods, it's really upsetting to me that as a society and culture is so willing to abandon all research and good science
and reason
to justify fat shaming.
And by the way, I started smoking because I didn't want to gain weight. And someone told me that smoking would, decrease appetite and hunger. And that's why I started smoking. Just as a little tangent to show how helpful shaming is,
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you're definitely not the first person I've heard say that. And especially in the dance world, it's rampant that people smoke to try to keep their weight down.
When I was in film school also, people started to take cocaine instead of eating. And that's when I stopped going to that school, because I was just, it terrified me, frankly. And I didn't think it was cool at all, but I thought, wow, this is really big. Everything else has a lesser priority than losing weight. And you cannot tell me that this is happening in the name of health. And people tell each other that they want to be healthy, yet they take up habits that are definitely to the detriment of their health, be it, constant over-exercising, not eating the nutrients they need, be it smoking, be it doing drugs, be it stressing out over every calorie. I mean, it's the worst you can do.
Yeah. Well, and it's, we seem to have this idea that thin by any means necessary is somehow healthier than being fat. I mean, if a thin person went to the doctor and the doctor said, tell me about, what you're eating. And they said, everything I eat is frozen in a plastic bag and I microwave it and then I eat it. The doctor would be like, hey, let's talk about that. As, maybe not the healthiest thing you could be doing. But if as a fat person I go to the doctor, that's what I get prescribed, right? Oh, do Nutrisystem and they'll send you all your food frozen in baggies and you just microwave it. Or thin people, they're told, a variety of foods in moderation, whole foods, slow foods, that kind of thing. For fat people, we're told drink 5 reconstituted soy protein shakes and have chicken breast and broccoli for dinner.
Yeah,
and
for the rest of your life.
Right. But other people would be told that, no, you need to have food. You shouldn't be drinking 5 protein shakes a day. And so it's interesting to me how, I often say in talks, if it was really true that thin by any means necessary is being fat, then they would just hand out cocaine, because it's pretty hard to, maintain a larger body size with a cocaine habit. But at least at some level, somebody understands that thin by any means necessary isn't better than being fat, but it goes pretty far.
And you said it, that fat people get prescribed stuff that would, in a thin person, be called eating disorder behavior.
Yeah.
I can't put it properly language-wise, but I think you know what I mean. We prescribe stuff and behavior to people in bigger bodies that would clearly be described as eating disorder behavior in a person that is in a thinner body. And so we don't even recognize that anorexia is a set of behaviors, not necessarily a body type. People in bigger bodies can have anorexic tendencies and anorexic symptoms just as well. They can lose their period. They can get really, really sick. But because they started off at a higher genetic weight, they are not even considered sick. And they're being prescribed stuff that makes them even sicker.
Yeah, Deb Burgard, who's a brilliant woman and part of the size acceptance fat activism movement and a hero of mine, was the first one who told me the idea that we, to fat people, what we would diagnose in someone thinner. like, what you're
Oh,
saying.
wow. Yeah, that's much better put. Would you please repeat that?
Sure. It's Deb Burgard said, that we prescribe to fat people the same things that we would diagnose as a problem in thinner people.
Why didn't you say that right at the start?
Sorry.
I made a fool of myself trying to explain it. Yeah.
No, I think what you said was right on and explained it really well. But it is, and especially since many fat people have had the experience, who've had eating disorders, have the experience of being encouraged in our eating disorders. I hear from people who went to their doctor and said, something's not right. Like, I feel I'm obsessing about food and constantly weak and tired, and I feel sick, but I can't make myself eat. And the doctor's like, well, you're 50 pounds down, so just keep doing whatever you're doing.
Exactly.
And that is malpractice. That's dangerous, but it happens pretty frequently. When I had my eating disorder, I was diagnosed as what at the time was called EDNOS, which was eating disorder not otherwise specified, because despite the fact that I had very low body fat, that I was clearly sick, I wasn't light enough to gain the same eating disorder diagnosis that someone thinner than me would have received. Because at the time you had to be a certain amount under your, like, quote unquote ideal body weight in order to be diagnosed.
Yeah.
And while I was in treatment for an eating disorder, I was being told by other doctors, because in treatment, I gained quite a bit of weight pretty rapidly. And so I was being told by doctors that I needed to lose weight to be healthy. And they were saying things like, don't go crazy like you did before. I had one doctor say, but you're going to have to worry about your weight for the rest of your life.
Yeah, I heard that.
That's exactly what you do not want to tell a person.
So what exactly were they suggesting you do?
Oh, so I was prescribed over a period of years, basically every diet, weight loss method, lifestyle change, whatever you want to call it, that exists, from basic eating plans to medically supervised shakes and bars kind of weight loss. I was prescribed everything, and I did them all because I felt like at that point, the only thing I felt like I knew for sure was that I could not be in charge of my own decisions, because like I had been too, quote unquote, too big, and I was, quote unquote, like too small, and I couldn't kind of Goldilocks it in the middle. And so, I believed that doctors were prescribing me something that was evidence-based, and I just did it. And when I had the experience that almost everyone has, which is I would lose weight in the short term and then gain it back in the long term, and the more diets I did, the quicker that cycle would happen, and the less I would lose and the more I would gain back, I thought that I was to blame, because that's what doctors seem to think. Mm-hmm. That everyone who tries hard enough loses weight, so why aren't you losing weight? It wasn't until I did my own literature review of the studies around dieting that I found out that I had been, sold a bill of goods.
Yeah. And before I forget, I want to mention the other thing that I read by Deb Burgard just a few days ago. She wrote, for almost everyone, engaging in weight loss really means weight cycling. And for some, the maintenance really is an eating disorder.
Yeah.
And for me, that's why I often talk about these 3%, that are often described as the miraculous little amount of the population that can maintain weight loss. And I think that's a very dangerous thing, just to put it like that, because for me, I was part of the 1 or 2 or 3%. And for me, that clearly meant engaging in eating disordered behavior and over-exercising. But I was a so-called diet success. But I was just as much suffering, and I was not a success at all. At best, I was a fake success. You know what I mean? And we often put it as, for some it miraculously works. Bullshit, it doesn't.
Yeah. Once people lose weight, we don't tend to ask a lot of questions.
Yeah, right.
In terms of like, what does your life look like now, and how much of your time and energy and money is spent trying to maintain a specific body size. Yeah,
it's a very expensive addiction, that dieting stuff.
Yeah.
So tell me about the research that you did. Oh, sorry, I cut you off.
No, not at all. So I had decided that I was going to find the best diet. And when I went to school, I worked in social work, but I focused on research methods and statistical analysis. And so I had the skills to review the studies, but it had never occurred to me to do so. I just assumed that every diet worked and that I was, doing it wrong. And so I decided, I went into the research not thinking, I don't think dieting works. I went into it thinking, all right, I'm going to find the best diet. I'm going to find the one that works the most for the most people, and that's what I'm going to do.
Yeah, really.
And so I started reading, you know what I mean? So I started reading through all these studies, and, study after study was saying the same thing. And when I got to the end of it, I was so shocked and in such a state of disbelief that I started again. And I went and I read through all of the same studies, hundreds of studies. And I was doing like the calculations by hand, thinking I must have missed something, because what I found was that there wasn't a single study anywhere where more than a tiny fraction of the people had lost any amount of weight. Typically that amount of weight was somewhere between 5 and 10 pounds, and typically they were gaining it back when the study stopped tracking them.
Or they became eating disorder just like I did.
Yeah, and that isn't tracked very much in the research at all. They don't talk about that.
Yeah, that has to change.
So that took me a lot longer to learn. What I saw was studies where like literally 70% of the subjects dropped out. The remaining 30% lost 5 pounds, and they called the diet a success. I mean, it was scientifically staggering. It was an affront to research, what I found.
It's a good opportunity also to teach people a little bit about scientific literacy, because, you know, the media, they're quick to just put out something, whatever study, you know, they tried to make this chocolate makes you lose weight study, just to see if they were able to publish that and get that in the media. And they did. They were successful, and it was based on nothing.
Yeah, they utilized p-hacking, which is a really common thing where you just hypothesize a ton of outcomes based on the chances that one of them will come up as statistically significant, and then you can use that. I mean, there was a study published about how much more fat people were costing in terms of gas for driving cars.
Are you kidding me?
And as a researcher, I was like, how did they even get that? No, like, that's a hard study to design. So I go and look at it. They didn't have information like how many fat people had driver's licenses, what kind of cars they drove, whether they were passengers or drivers or both. They used driving information from the 1960s. I mean, it was basically a back of the envelope like calculation you could do at a bar while drinking. But it got covered as a serious study, as if they had really studied this, and, you know, and sort of anything that says fat people are causing a problem in the world gets published.
Yeah, and they will get blown out of
science.
Proportion also. So what is important for people to know about science and about studies and about which ones to trust? Because as soon as we say it's not scientifically proven that diets work, other people come up with 1,000 articles and say, yes, they do. But in fact, they don't. So how can we help people to be more scientifically literate?
So there are some common things that weight loss studies do. And again, Deborah Gard talks about this a lot. And a lot of it has to do with the people who they choose to be in the study and then the people who drop out. Right. So if people drop out of the study and they either act like those people never existed, or they act like those people had the same success as their most successful subjects in the conclusion, that's a huge problem. Because if you aren't succeeding at, you know, quote unquote, succeeding at the diet or weight loss, you're much more likely to drop out of the study. Or if it makes you so miserable that, you know, you just can't continue, that's important information to have. Mm-hmm. And when they just eliminate those people from the studies, that becomes a huge problem.
Or call them non-compliant or something, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Like, oh, these people just, you know, were weak-willed or whatever.
If it doesn't work, they must be lying about the amount they are eating.
Exactly. I mean, for me, I love research and science. And so I used to, you know, debate until the cows came home about these studies. And what I have started doing now is saying, if you think weight loss actually works, you need to show me some research where the majority of subjects lost the amount of weight that we're telling people that they need to lose, right? So not 5 pounds, not 10 pounds, but, you know, if you're going to say that, for example, the BMI chart is a legitimate way to judge health, which it's not, but if that's your belief, then I want to see people who move from the quote-unquote obese category to the quote-unquote healthy weight category and maintain that for 5 years. And so I'm more and more, I want to put the onus on the people who are saying that weight loss works to prove what they're saying, because you can't prove a negative. So if people want to tell me that they believe that weight loss is a good way to become healthy, I want to see the research. And it's two-part, right? First is the research that would show that we can become and maintain a thinner body. But then we would also need research that would tell us that that would make us healthier. And I think the thing that blew my mind the most when I did the literature review is that we don't have that at all. we don't have any research where they take people who had successfully suppressed their weight over a long period of time to see if they have the same health outcomes as people who always lived in thinner bodies or people who lived in larger bodies but, practiced habits that support health. Like, we just don't study that. They just say, we're going to compare thin people to fat people, and we're going to say if we can make fat people look like thin people, we're going to assume they're going to have the same health outcomes, which is dangerous and based on only correlation and not causation, which is another huge issue within research, is this idea that if we can vaguely correlate two things, we can just say, okay, definitely fat is bad. One of the examples I use is that men with male pattern baldness also have higher rates of cardiac incidences. Mm-hmm. But if we get those guys to grow hair, it's not going to change their heart attack risk.
Because it's a testosterone problem and
exactly.
Which causes it's like with the yellow teeth, and yellow teeth cause lung cancer. And, the common denominator is smoking, but the yellow teeth, teeth whitener will not stop your lung cancer from developing. So there's so much BS out there to blow up that I don't even know where to start with you. So just throw everything out there.
Yeah, I mean, it is really so. Correlation and causation is a massive thing to understand. So correlation means two things happen with statistical regularity at the same time. Causation means we know that one makes the other happen. And so the example I use for this is that there are some studies that show that in August, the amount of ice cream that's eaten goes up in the United States, as does the amount of murder. And so we could conclude, eating ice cream makes people murder someone. And so we could take all the ice cream off the shelves to try to prevent that. And then we might find that the murder rate skyrockets, right? And so what might actually be happening is that in August it gets hotter, a third factor that we hadn't considered, and that when it's hot, people either cool off by eating ice cream or they murder someone. And so if we take away the cool off by eating ice cream option, people are more likely to murder someone. And that's why we don't make decisions based on correlation, because if you don't understand the mechanism by which causality works, just making random guesses and changing things can actually have the opposite of the intended effect.
Exactly. And we have, there's so much bias also out there that it's really hard to, there's so many arguments being, the resistance, whatever you say gets a lot of pushback. Let's say people have these preconceived notions about fat people being, let's say, lazy or sedentary. And then I'm like, what makes you even think that? Just where did you get the idea? And I can tell you that because one of my grandmothers was extremely sedentary, but she was skinny. But she didn't move around. So if people say, yes, but I want to lose weight because I want to increase my mobility and I want to be able to chase after my kids, or I want to be able to walk upstairs and not be totally out of breath, I'd be, you don't need to lose weight for that. Why don't you just move your body more for that? Because my grandmother was as out of breath as anyone who did not engage in any sort of movement at all. So, being skinny didn't make her run up and down stairs and chasing after her kids.
Yeah, there's so much to unpack with all of that. The first thing is, we have this idea that fat people have some obligation to exercise or be not lazy or be not mobile that thin people don't have. Right. And so there are tons of thin people who are sedentary and lazy. And as long as they stay thin, we're kind of fine with that. But if you're fat, there's this belief that, if you're fat, then you need to be out there exercising. And there's this thing called the good fatty, bad fatty dichotomy.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that.
Yeah. People say there are two kinds of fat people. And I'm okay with fat people who quote unquote take care of themselves, which means whatever that person thinks it means, but those other fat people who are, who don't exercise or are lazy or don't eat healthy by whatever my definition is, I'm not okay with that. And that's bullshit, and that needs to stop immediately. Health is not a barometer of worthiness. It's not an obligation. It's not entirely within our control.
Where does this come from then? I mean, all this, as long as you're healthy stuff, that is inherently disrespectful of people that are having health issues or that are living with disabilities. What are we saying?
Yeah.
That they are not worthy because they have heart problems or depression? Is it not okay to not be healthy? Does that have an inherent moral value? Come on.
Yeah, I mean, it's health is an ableist. Health is not guaranteed no matter what you do, but it's not, nobody owes anybody else health or healthy habits by any definition. And it becomes super problematic for fat people because it's a way for people to maintain their stereotypes and prejudice against fat people while taking some fat people and putting them, in the good fatty category. And this is a privilege that I benefit from because I do happen to enjoy doing physical activity. Mm-hmm. And so people put me in the, right, but you're mobile and you're,
at least you're doing something.
This exercise. So at least you're doing something. Oh, and it's super gross. And I have no interest in being given this privilege, but it's like all privilege. Like I didn't ask for it. I can't give it away, but I can try to use it. And so when I talk about fitness and athletics and fat people, I always try to be really clear. Like nobody has to do this. It doesn't make you better or worse. Having a Netflix marathon or running a marathon are morally equivalent.
Yeah, but why has it become such a moral issue to even prompt a comment like, at least you're doing something?
I think because we're told, in the United States, the government tells people to stereotype fat people to assume that we are drains on society, quote unquote, drains on the healthcare system, and that the best thing they can do is encourage us to lose weight. And they've told people that anyone who, quote, eats healthy and exercises will be a, quote, healthy weight. And none of that, the whole thing is a mess. Right? There are people who eat exactly the same and have vastly different body sizes. There are people who eat very differently and have exactly the same body sizes. It's not a input-output situation like people want to believe that it is. Body size is incredibly complicated. It's not entirely within our control. But people want to point to the few people who do succeed at weight loss and say, see, if anybody did it, then everyone can do it, which isn't true. People, skydive and their parachute doesn't open and they don't die. Right, but that doesn't mean that you can open the school of parachuteless skydiving because if somebody can survive the fall, everybody can. That's not how that works. But it's how it's used.
Powerful example.
So it's this situation where people have been emboldened to believe their stereotypes about people who only share the only thing fat people have in common is a single physical characteristic. But people feel comfortable and emboldened, in many cases by the government, to go ahead and stereotype those people and then comment, and to believe that if they're not fat, that makes them an expert in becoming thin, which is ridiculous.
Yeah.
But I think that's what creates this culture of, the good fatty, bad fatty dichotomy, the idea that exercising is some moral imperative for fat people, the idea that it's okay to comment on what a fat person is eating in public. I've had people come up and point to my food and say, this is why you're fat, in a restaurant, strangers. And I've had people congratulate me for eating a salad or vegetables, assuming that I'm doing it to try to manipulate my body size. So we've created a situation where fat bodies are seen as public property and as commentable. Just go up to a fat person and say whatever you think about them. And it's super messed up. It's absolutely wrong. But that's kind of where we are. And that's something that fat people have to deal with all the time if, the minute we leave our houses or turn on a television.
Yeah. There seems to be some entire drama being played out in the field of food and diet and weight nowadays. For someone who's, let's say, vegan, the enemy is the paleo, and for someone who is paleo, you know what I mean? I don't even keep track of all of this. So why do we need to label anything? If I ate vegan, which I don't, but if I did, then why would I have to label myself? If I ever feel like meat or honey, then I can't do it just because I labeled myself, and I have to put others down that have the audacity to eat honey or what. The current wars being fought over who eats what and who polices what other people eat and what other people look like. It's as if it's the new religion.
Yeah, in many ways it is. There are all kinds of reasons people choose different ways of eating. And a lot of people who choose vegetarian or vegan do it because of their ideas about morality around food. And they have every right to make that choice.
Yes, of course.
But the problem occurs when people start to suggest that their choice is the only choice, the right choice, the choice that everyone else has to make. And especially when it gets wrapped up in body size. And I know a number of fat vegans, and they're vegan for moral reasons, and they are treated terribly.
Really?
By vegan community. Terribly, because they're seen as not doing veganism right, because of this idea that veganism is the healthiest way to eat, and everybody who eats vegan, is quote unquote healthy, which to them is synonymous with thin. It's, fat vegans are treated, and often fat vegetarians as well, treated horribly by many people in those communities.
It's so bigoted.
Yes.
Oh my God. Even, let's say you're riding your bike, the good, fatty, bad, fatty dichotomy. Even that, let's say you're riding your bike because you want to be perceived as someone who does something, the quote unquote, at least you're doing something. But still, people like you, let's say in this example, someone it happened, thrown an egg at you and called you names and called you fat pig or whatever. So no matter what you do, it's not okay. If you're eating meat, it's not okay. If you're a vegan, then you're not the right representative of veganism and you're getting ostracized there. If you're not moving, then you're a lazy pig. If you're moving, people don't want to see you move. So how is this ever supposed to help anyone?
Well, and it's not. At the root of this is that people are bigoted against fat people. Mm-hmm. And everything that comes from that becomes a way to justify and or express that bigotry. So at the base of all of it, at the base of being mistreated by vegan, being told that you should eat however you're not eating, if you're eating paleo, that's why you're fat. If you're eating vegan, that's why you're fat. If you're, not prescribing to a certain diet or eating plan, that's why you're fat. These are all things that stem from the idea that there's a problem with a higher body weight, and that it's something that people should be allowed to comment on and stereotype. It's the base of it is bigotry, and then everything grows from that. And so I think it's really important in fat activism that we not get caught up. And I used to make this mistake. I used to, throw out my numbers and say, like, you can be fat and healthy. And I think that that's an important thing for people to know, because there are people who believe that they have no chance at health because they're fat, and so they make different choices than they would if they knew that people can be healthy and unhealthy at various sizes, and that there are options to pursue supporting your health outside of weight loss. I think those are important things to say, but they're not important to the base of fat activism, which is that people have a right to exist in fat bodies without shame, stigma, bullying, or oppression. And it doesn't matter why we're fat. And it doesn't matter, what being fat, quote unquote, means or what the quote consequences of being fat are. We have the right to exist. The rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness are not and should never be size or health or healthy habit dependent.
No one should be categorized. No one should be dehumanized based on no reason at all.
Yeah.
And I mean, what we're seeing is proof of the exact opposite with all the layers of fat phobia that we see. I mean, it's outrageous nowadays.
Yeah.
And I think in order for us to really talk about all the layers of fat phobia, we first need to accept the fact that we ourselves have blindly subscribed to these ideas of bodies having to look a certain way. And we have to put that in question first in order to wake up to the fact how much fat phobia there is out there. Because we ourselves, many of us, have subscribed to this idea. Not even on a conscious level maybe, but we have gobbled it up. The messages that we got when we were kids or when we were growing up, especially women, that we are not good enough as we are, we gobbled them up innocently. Yeah. And we lived by them.
And it's reinforced every single day. I don't think there's a concept that's been sold to me more aggressively than the ideas that I could be thin and that being thin would make me healthy. And yet there's no research to support that. But it's been sold to me and continues to be sold to me aggressively every single day, both consciously by diet and weight loss companies and subconsciously by what we see on television, the kind of jokes that we hear. I went to a comedy special. I love stand-up comedy. And I went to a live comedy show. And this guy, his set was fine, but he said that he used to work in a sporting goods store. And he said this kind of big lady came in and she said she needed a sports bra. And I was like, well, what sport are you playing there, Chief? And that was the entire joke. And he got the biggest laugh of his entire set by suggesting that it was hilarious that a big woman would want a sports bra.
What? That's the cheapest job I've ever heard.
Come on, like just lazy, shitty comedy. But it gets constantly reinforced, this idea. And so even once you are aware of it, you still have to be constantly sort of guarding against subconsciously believing these ideas. I think it's a lifelong thing to keep aware. And for me, I talk a lot about using a mantra so that whenever you see it, you have this like short thing that you say to remind yourself that this is not okay. And my personal mantra is, hey, that's bullshit. And so I probably think that 200 times a day. Every billboard that I see, every weight loss commercial, every time Oprah comes in my house talking nonsense about eating bread, I'm like, oh, that's bullshit. Hey, that's bullshit. Hey, that's bullshit. And now it's a subconscious thing, so it never really even reaches into my conscious because my brain shuts it down immediately.
Wow. I bet you worked hard on that.
I did. A lot of the work that I did was working really hard in the beginning to create these systems and these habits to guard me against this society that's so prejudiced and bigoted against my body. And then, just using those constantly. The most powerful thing I ever did on my journey was I had just quit a weight loss program where I was doing an incredibly strict diet and gaining a pound a week. And I quit, and they tried to get me not to quit. And they, the woman at one point said, aren't you tired of hating your body? And I was like,
yes,
damn right I am. I am exhausted from hating it. And I hated my body like it was a job, like I was being paid. And it never made me healthier or happier or thinner. I was just miserable and I was tired. And so I went home and I got out a notebook and I wrote pages of everything I could think of that my body did for me. And I got like granular, like breathing, blinking, heartbeat, waist management, like everything. And then I started to become really conscious about my thoughts about my body. And then I started to replace, when I would have the negative thought, I would stop myself and I would replace it with gratitude for anything on that list. Right. So it didn't have to be one for one. So I'd, walk past a mirror and be like, oh, I hate whatever body part. And then I'd be like, nope. Thank you for breathing, body. You're doing an awesome job breathing. I really appreciate that. And over a period of months of really intensely working on that, I completely shifted my relationship to my body. It took about 3 months to really shift things for me, but it was 3 months of daily intense work. And of course, your mileage may vary. Everybody will respond differently. But for me, I started to think of my body as a friend. And I don't let people treat my friends the way that I let people and that I myself treated my body. I won't stand for it. I would never let someone talk about one of my friends the way I allowed people to talk about my body. And so the more I thought of my body as a friend, all that work allowed me to believe that it was me and my body against a problem and not me against my body.
So you had a lot of self-worth to build on already, it sounds. Because if you don't have that, then it's really hard to counteract.
Yeah.
I mean, I use the gratitude stuff as well, but it doesn't seem to work as well, and certainly not in 3 months. And I think that's, first of all, because I don't even remember a time when I felt like I deserved to be here. And also because I did it for so long. I don't know why exactly, but I think it must be something very deep, because otherwise you just, if someone says, hey, you can stop hating your body, you'd be like, oh, yeah, right. Yeah. Great idea. Thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think you must have had a lot of self-worth already to build on. And I wonder, is that because you were being told that when you were a kid, that you were worthy and you're appreciated and that you were good to be around and good to have?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely have a lot of privilege where that is concerned. I had, my mom especially was, if you called my mom and told her that, I was an axe murderer, she would be like, well, what did those people do to make my baby kill them? Right? Which can be good or bad, but my mom is on my side 100%.
That helps.
It helps a lot. I mean, I grew up believing that I was good and worthy, and I was in trouble all the time in school for pushing boundaries. And my mom would truck in there, once a week if she had to. We'd sit in the principal's office and they'd go through it again. But she was always on my side, and so I grew up with a sense that I was worthy. And I mean, it helped to be athletically successful. This, that's something that is in our world, unfortunately, considered important or morally good.
Yeah, morally good.
And there's a lot of stuff I'm terrible at. I had to cut a deal to not have my home ec class ruin my GPA because I can't sew for crap. Right. But nobody says, oh, like, you don't sew. What's wrong with you? Oh, you must not be trying hard enough.
Right.
The reason you're fat is because you don't sew. And so that's just a privilege. It's something that happened to me that I think made things a lot easier moving forward, was that I had that base of, body love and body confidence to build from. So it can, like I said, your mileage may vary. For me, it was 3 months of intense work, but it, for a lot of people, it can be a lot longer. It can be a lifetime, and it's not their fault. It's because we live in a world, this should not be necessary. That's one of the things that I think is really important to understand about fat activism. We shouldn't have to do this. And the idea that it's hard, or that people struggle at it, or that people are never able to fully be okay in a fat body is not a deficiency in them. It's because we lived in a society that is extremely, extremely messed up.
Oh, yeah.
And we are the victims of that. And the fact that we have to work so hard for something that should be so basic and so easy and should never be questioned, the idea that we're worthy and valid regardless of our health or ability or size, the fact that we have to work so hard to get there is indicative of a problem with society and not a problem with us.
It's terrible. How did you even get into the fat activism? Was it because you wanted to dance and people didn't want to see you dance because you were not according to their dancer's body ideal?
Yeah, I got into fat activism kind of accidentally. I got into ballroom dance, and it was sort of a whirl. We decided we wanted to compete, and so we had to learn 4 different dance styles, and then we competed within 3 months of when we got our first coach. And so I was so focused on learning these dances and getting the technique exactly right that it didn't occur to me that my body was going to be a problem. And that's so when I look back, that's so naive and so ridiculous. But that's kind of where I was. I was just so focused. And so we went to our first competition.
What a beautiful state of mind.
Wouldn't that be great if that were the case, right?
Yeah.
How lovely would that have been? And so, we were competing as newcomers, but I had a strong dance background. And so I was performing, and we got a lot of crowd support, and people, really responded well. But then judges started coming up to me and saying things like, wow, you're going to lose weight, right? And I had a judge say, what a waste of talent at your size. And the sort of climax of this was I was at this competition. I was sick. I did not dance well. And I was just trying to get back to my hotel room. I was carrying like 3 dresses and all of my makeup and hair stuff and my shoes and like trying to get on the elevator, carrying all this crap. And this judge comes like flying at me, and she sort of pins me against the elevator. I'm holding all this stuff. I'm sick, had a bad day of dancing. And she says, we need to talk about your waltz. And I said, oh, I know, it wasn't good today. And she said, no, we need to talk about your dress. And I was surprised because I had gotten this beautiful, it was black velvet with spaghetti straps and red embroidery, gorgeous dress. And she said, I couldn't stand to look at you. And
it's almost, sorry, go ahead. I cannot compute.
So I'm standing there, and I have this moment of like, do I go off on this person, or do I just like let it go and be like, quote unquote, classy? And honestly, I was just tired. And
she does it again.
So I said, okay. And she said, I couldn't stand to look at you. And this went on, this happened like 4 times. And finally she said, I talked to Rowdy, who was my coach, and he said I could talk to you about this. And so I was like, look, I'm 30, so you don't have to ask anybody's permission to talk to me. I said, in truth, I probably won't choose to change the dress, but I appreciate you taking the time to tell me it's such a problem for you.
Oh, God.
And so in the middle of this, at some point, she stuck her finger in my face and like with spittle coming out of her mouth, was like, you have no business wearing spaghetti straps. And I was like, wow, this is not about me at all. Like this is all like their issues that they're trying to put on me. And so I just finally decided to say, like, let's put the problem where it belongs. You were the problem here. I'm fine. I'm going to wear this dress. And so, I said, I appreciate you taking the time to tell me such a problem for you. And her face got super red. And I thought she was going to take a swing at me. She was so mad, but she just turned and walked away.
Why? Why are people getting so mad if some person in a fat body, I use fat totally neutral, I think you know that by now, if a person in a fat body has the audacity to be happy as they are, why do people get so inexplicably mad?
Well, I think it's explicable in that this is a person I learned later she does this apparently to a lot of people, but nobody ever talks about it. Well, I told anyone who would listen, you will not believe what just happened to me. And because I knew like this is going to happen to other people unless we bring it out into the light and say that it's wrong. They said, she has real big body image issues and she kind of keeps gaining and losing the same 20 pounds. And when she loses it, she wears beautiful clothes and she's like really confident. But when she gains the weight, she wears all black and she doesn't have confidence. And so like, I don't know. I think that women especially, but all people are under this tremendous pressure to meet this thin ideal. And for me as a fat person to be like, I'm tagging out. I'm opting out. I'm not doing that anymore. I'm going to take the body I have out for a spin. I'm going to lead the best life I can lead, the life that I want to lead to the best of my ability in the body that I have. Is such an affront because they're spending so much time and energy and money, chasing this ideal, believing that they're obligated to do it. And so when somebody goes, yeah, I'm not doing that, it's infuriating. Like, how dare you not conform to this thing that I spend all of my life trying to conform to? How dare you not care? Because if you believe that to be thin is to be valuable, and you place your self-esteem and value on the fact that you've achieved that, you've become thin, and I come along and say, I think being thin is fine, but it's no more valuable than being fat, then I challenge everything that gives you your self-esteem. I challenge everything that you believe makes you good, then that's going to cause people to get angry and to strike out at someone.
Yeah, and since diet culture and all its profiteers have successfully coupled the concept of weight and health, then they also wave the health card, like telling you you have no business being happy because you cannot be healthy.
Yeah. Well, they pair weight and health, and then they make health morality. Mm-hmm. And so then transitive property, weight is morality. And so, it's not just that you're not healthy, it's that you're an immoral person. It's that you're not trying. It's that you're, it's this healthist, ableist message of you have to be a thin, healthy, able-bodied producer of work or you're not worthy. And that is at the base of a lot of this, and it's so wrong, and it's got to change. But it's an intersectional oppression, and so you've got fat bigotry and size bigotry, you've got ableism and healthism, and then you layer something like racism on top of that, where racism is massively prevalent and deadly in our society. And then at the intersections of being fat and being a person of color are all different kinds of oppression. And so it just keeps getting kind of layered and layered. Fat and disability is an area of intersectional oppression that is, life altering, because the belief that if you're disabled, it's because you're fat and that's a problem, right? So that maybe you deserve less accommodation than someone who's disabled but not fat, or you deserve to have your picture taken in Walmart because you're using a scooter to go about your daily life. Like there's some morality and something wrong with that. Is a horrific type of oppression that people who are fat and have disabilities deal with. Yeah.
And so, that the other people, the blamers and the haters, they don't even recognize their own privileges. That's the worst.
Right. And one of the things about disability is that we're all 10 minutes away from being disabled. It's one car accident. It's one illness diagnosis. And so the belief that our health and our ability are entirely due to our own input, right? Which is part of the morality of it. Like, well, I'm healthy because of the way I eat and the way I exercise, as if there's nothing else that contributes to that. There's no genetics, there's no environment, there's no privilege of being white or being born into a middle-class family that could afford healthcare. Like, none of that counts. It's only because I eat paleo. That's why I'm healthy and I deserve, praise for that. It all wraps up into this morality and healthism and ableism that we see within greater culture.
Yeah, and they do it with a vehemence as if it were death-defying, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I think, yeah.
And I just also, sports injuries are super expensive and unnecessary. Nobody needs to jump out of a helicopter wearing skis. Unless they're rescuing somebody. Nobody needs to play professional football.
But they get to be the cool ones, right?
They do. And when they get injured, we're sort of fine with that. Like, it's incredibly expensive. And most professional football players go broke almost immediately after they leave, and they have lifelong health issues that end up being taxpayer funded, but nobody's adding up that money and saying,
nobody's blaming them.
And nobody's like, oh, why'd you play professional sports?
Goddamn heli skiing.
Yeah, you stop jumping out of helicopters wearing skis and you break your leg less. Nobody says that. We have this idea that like sports are so, because research shows that, 30 minutes of moderate activity 5 days a week is a really good kind of place to get health benefits from exercise and movement. And so like nobody needs to be out there doing dangerous sports that cause injuries for their health. Right. Nobody needs to do CrossFit for their health. You're allowed to do whatever you want with your body, and everybody should be. Right? If you want to jump out of a helicopter wearing skis, knock yourself out. Right? If you want to be completely sedentary, knock yourself out. Morally equivalent.
Yeah.
But we don't talk about athletes the way that we talk about fat people, even though athletes really are out there putting their health in danger in ways that aren't necessary. And that's fine. I'm not trying to make the case that they shouldn't. I'm trying to point out that we treat these things very differently, even though the way we talk about them, they should be the same.
Exactly. And what I wanted to ask is really, how do you do what you do? As an activist who unapologetically speaks her mind and won't let the haters shut you up, thank God, you get incredibly painful pushback and hate mail and, general resistance. So it goes so far as to people creating entire forums and websites about you, which is ridiculous, with the sole intent of pulling your name sort of through the dirt and calling you the worst names one could imagine, which, by the way, is just another proof of the existence of fat phobia. But anyway, when I see how harshly you are being attacked online, I can't help but think I would never have the strength to go on to do what you do. So where did you get that strength from to just deal with it?
Yeah, I think it's something that I was born with and that I then developed over kind of a slogged out childhood of moving to different schools and constantly being the new kid. And, I developed a thick skin. And it's one of the reasons that I chose to do this activism is that I can deal with that. It gets, like you said, ridiculous. I can remember the first time I got a hate comment and it was fatty's gonna fat. And I was like, that's the silliest thing that anybody's ever said.
How
like,
original.
Right? First of all, you could say fatty's gonna fat fattily and make fat into 4 different parts of speech. I'd have some respect for you. But like fatty's gonna fat, like really? I just sometimes I feel like it's not that, if I can not have, if I can't get rid of my haters, like, could I just get a higher quality?
Right.
But yeah, so it went from fatty's gonna fat to now there are multiple forums online specifically devoted to hating me personally. It's not just getting 100 emails a day, telling me to kill myself. It's also every time I get booked for a speaking gig, they're sending out this list of lies about me to try to get the speaking gig canceled. I had a speaking gig protested. Somebody set off a fire alarm to try to get my talk canceled at a college. And to the college's credit, we waited it out and we marched right back in and we did that talk. And more people came than were going to come because they wanted to know, like, what was this the whole big deal about? And it was a totally benign talk about like movement for people of all sizes. So they did not get the controversy that they wanted. But I think that's really important. It is the vehemence with which fat activists get trolled is shocking.
Yeah, but
it's absolutely shocking.
Is it again because people don't want to see you happy? Or is it because they are simply bored and don't have a purpose in their life? Or
I think that, I don't know what has to happen in your life that you are at your home and you could do anything you wanted with your time. The internet allows you to do, you could be playing games, you could be reading Wikipedia, you could be watching television, but what you're doing is sending me an email telling me to kill myself. Like that's what you've arrived at as a way to spend your time. I don't know how bad your life has to get that's what you do. And so I try to have some compassion. Like these people are broken. I look at the life that I'm leading and I look at the life that you would have to lead for that to be like, I'm going to create a website to be against a blogger I don't like. And I want to say a lot of people talk about like, oh, fat is the last acceptable prejudice. And that is not true at all. Black men, women, and children are being killed in the streets by police here. Trans people can't use the bathrooms. There's tons of prejudice out there that is far too acceptable. But fat, is a type of prejudice that one of the many types that is acceptable. And so people sort of rally around that. And there was a Reddit forum called like Fat People Hate, and it had 150,000 people in it.
What?
150,000 people who gathered for the purpose of hating people for how they look and their stereotypes about that. like, how do you end up, I don't understand. I can't imagine. I don't have the time to read all the blogs of people whose work I like, right? I run out of time to read all the things I want to read. I can't imagine spending my time. And in some cases, it's a tremendous amount of time.
Reading stuff they don't want to read.
Going after somebody I don't like. Here's an idea. Don't read it.
Yeah. I think they just hate for you to be vocal. They hate for you to be visible. They hate for you to be happy. They hate for you to have sex. They hate for you to just be here and claim your space. You know what I mean? Because maybe, it reflects on their deeper issues of thinking they're not worthy to be here, or, they're projecting all sorts of stuff onto people who are vocal.
Yeah. I think a lot of it comes down to, like, I'm thin and I hate myself. So, like, how bloody dare you be fat and love yourself, be fat and go and in public and do stuff that I'm scared to do. Like, how dare you? And I think that a lot of the hatred comes from that. Like, I hate myself and I'm thin. It's like, how dare these fat people go out there and think that they deserve to have experiences and a life that they love? How dare they? Here's how in general, I think about it like this. The amount of hate that I get is an indication of how important the work I do is and how good I am at it.
Yeah, that's just what Brené Brown says. The minute you are in the arena and you're actually visible and you're doing something, you will get haters, which is an indication that you're doing something and you're not just standing on the sidelines, yelling cheap comments into the arena and not doing anything yourself.
Yeah. And I think, Reggie Jackson is a hero of mine, and I am not in any way comparing myself to Reggie Jackson, but he said they don't boo nobodies.
Right.
And so it's something that I think of a lot. Like, if I wasn't being effective at my work, if people who feel like this about fat people hate me, that tells me I'm doing exactly the right thing.
Mm-hmm. And I cannot help to think that it's also about you being a woman, about us being women, talking about that stuff, about even thinking about coming out of the shadows and saying enough is enough. We're going to resist sexism. We're going to resist misogyny. We're going to resist racism and classism and anything. You know what I mean? They don't want us to. They'd rather we'd keep on dieting and being nicely stowed away in the kitchen and looking according to their own sexual needs, whatever the hell.
Yeah. I'm
not here to do that.
Yeah, and I think that, misogyny is a huge part of this. And there's a huge crossover between, for example, the Gamergate trolls and fat hate trolls. And I think that part of it is that these are men who believe that women should judge their value based on whether or not they think we're attractive. So, like, people think that a good trolling mechanism is to send me an email to tell me they don't want to have sex with me. And I'm like, that is fantastic news.
Exactly. Like, what are you thinking?
But they have this idea that, like, I think that they're so incensed. How dare you not care if I think you're attractive? And I'm like, I just really don't. Like, okay, I think you're ugly. Okay. Mm-hmm. And like, I don't understand what that has to do with me at all. Sounds like a you problem. Like, there are 3 other cardinal directions that you can look, so go ahead. But there's this misogyny that women owe men attractive by their specific definition, and that we should judge ourselves. We should only think that we're good and worthy based on, our level of, like, fuckability.
Fuckability, I wanted to say that. That's the word. Is it about that? And the minute we recognize that, it gets ridiculous, and you want to say, no, I'm not here to score higher on a fuckability meter anyway. If someone wants to be with me, I once had a friend when I was in my first apprenticeship, 16. I had a friend that was really, really beautiful. She was asked by Elite to be a model and blah, blah, blah. And everybody wanted to, have her as a girlfriend and fuck her. Mm-hmm. Really. And for me, it was terrible because I thought everybody loved her, really loved her, and everybody wanted to be with her. So for me, it was like proof that I was not worth anything. And she got all the boys, but only 20 years later, she told me, hey, I never knew who loved me and who didn't, because they all just wanted to insert their dicks into me.
Yeah.
And that, sorry to be as blunt as I am, but I had never thought of it that way. She said I could never tell what I'm being loved for. And That's terrible. I mean, are we really striving to do that as women?
Yeah.
You know, it rubs me the wrong way. I mean, I feel it physically. Like, this is wrong.
Yeah. Yeah. I have friends who are stereotypically attractive who talk about feeling like they're being dated as a status symbol. You know, this idea that like having a quote unquote pretty woman on your arm is a status symbol for men. And so they never know, like, does this person really love me for me, or do they think that I look like I'm supposed to look so that they can get the status of having the pretty girl? I mean, misogyny is so pervasive. You know, it pervades every aspect of society. And this idea of, you know, women's value based on our ability to approximate a stereotype of beauty that is, you know, at this point, almost impossible for everyone. You know, so many of we don't see hardly ever an unphotoshopped picture. Our standard of beauty is a digitally enhanced one. It can only be achieved through Photoshop. And yet we're out there believing that we have to spend all our time and energy and money trying to get that done, you know, so that men will find us attractive. No, I'm out. I'm not interested in that at all.
And so that entire industries get rich. I mean,
yeah, billions of dollars in this.
Yeah, by us believing that. And it also, you know, when we discuss the concept of patriarchy and women wanting to tear patriarchy down, which I love the idea, but then certain men feel excluded. But I think, no, this patriarchy thing is also very much hurting men as well, because I heard men say that they thought they had to have the thin girlfriend to be accepted by their friends, when in fact they weren't really into the skinny girl or skinny girls, but they were afraid to openly admit that they were into curves. I mean, I know a guy who's really into curves, and he had a hard time like coming out saying that, because he thought that his buddies wouldn't think he was cool. Or, you know, how they think they must act and not show emotions, and how they think they must be CEOs to prove and stuff. They get put into boxes as well.
Yeah. I mean, patriarchy hurts men, women, and people of all genders.
Exactly.
Trans people, non-binary people. And it's interesting to see, you know, there's a quote, and I have looked forever and cannot find an attribution for it, but it's that when you're accustomed to privilege, equality feels like oppression.
Oh, come again. I got to compute this.
So when you're accustomed to privilege, equality feels like oppression.
Because I'm so used to my privileged position that if anyone else asks to be at my eye level, then I perceive it as a threat.
As being oppressed. Like, if somebody says there are lots of holidays during the end of the year, and so we don't need to, so we're going to say happy holidays instead of Merry Christmas. And someone who is Christian says that's oppressive to Christians because they believe that everyone should focus on their holiday because that's what has traditionally been done. Right. So they've traditionally been in a position of privilege because everybody caters to their holiday. Everybody puts up decorations about their holiday. And so when someone says, no, actually, you know what? There are so many holidays and we've been, you know, oppressing people who are part of other holidays by not making them part of the celebration. So we're going to celebrate everyone and say happy holidays, which will include your holiday, but also other people's holidays. And someone says, oh, no, that's oppressing me. It's because they were privileged and now they're equal. But it feels like oppression to them because they're used to the privilege as being the normative state. So
they feel inherently threatened by everything that is touching their cake, let's say.
Right. So if somebody is being privileged because they're thin, so, you know, all the seats in the theater are made for thin people. And now all of a sudden, nope, you know, we're going to make seats that fit other people. You know, well, that's not fair, right? It's this idea that it's not just that I'm privileged, but I am better than other people, so I should be treated better than other people. You know, people get absolutely livid that a fat person would get enough room on a plane. Well, why should they get 2 seats for the same price? Well, it's not a matter of 2 seats. It's that you get to fly from point A to point B in a seat that accommodates you. I should get the exact same treatment. It's not special treatment for me to get the exact same thing that you are getting.
Yeah, but if they still believe in the diet culture crap, then they have the mindset of you could do something about that. And therein lays the problem, that we all buy into this stereotypical diet culture bullshit, which is not even based on science.
Yeah, Yeah, adding insult to injury, the idea of trying to become thin is so insidious is that the majority of people, based on the research, will actually end up fatter than they started.
Mm-hmm.
So if for whatever reason you think being fat is bad, statistically, the worst advice you could give someone is to try to become thinner.
Mm-hmm.
Because the majority outcome is that they're going to end up fatter than when they started.
Yeah.
So even if you think fat is bad, it makes literally no sense to recommend that people try to become thin.
Yeah, and it doesn't make sense to call them all. They say that they're all non-compliant. And I say like, okay, so you're saying that 97% of all the dieters are non-compliant? That seems like a mighty high percentage of non-compliance. What the hell?
Yeah, from a medical standpoint, if we are prescribing something to people and the vast majority of people are not going to be helped by it and the majority are going to have the opposite of the intended effect, we stop prescribing that. Even if the problem is that people are non-compliant, we still look for better ways, right? There are health issues that cause complicated regimens of pill taking.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so when that happens, there's less compliance because it's really hard for people to take, a whole bunch of pills at various different times during their day. And so research continues to make that easier, to make that better. They don't just say, well, if you can't do it, then I guess you're, out of luck.
Yeah, so let's make this surgery. The success rate is 3%. You might die, but do it.
Yeah.
No one would do it.
So not only is this idea of losing weight to be quote unquote healthier or to be treated better bullshit from a civil rights standpoint, it can't even be backed up by the medical establishment that's suggesting it. It can't be backed up by research. It can't be backed up by the concepts of evidence-based medicine and informed consent. It simply can't be backed up. It's a slotted off black box of medicine where we just say, for this one thing, when we talk about fat people, we're just going to ignore everything that we would normally do in terms of medical ethics. We're just going to ignore that just for this group of people who look this certain way. And so they risk our lives. I mean, we're talking about pills and surgeries that are known to kill us. Mm-hmm. The belief that, the war on obesity is basically, we want you thinner, we want you dead, and we don't much care which. Right. We're happy to kill you to try to make you thin. We're fine with that. And if you're not willing to be killed, we're going to get really angry. When I decline to talk about stomach amputation, doctors get really upset. Well, why won't you do something about this? This is important. Like, I'm not willing to die or have lifelong horrific side effects so that I can maybe be thin. I'm not interested in that. No, it doesn't meet the requirements of medical ethics.
No.
And
a lot of fat people don't even get adequate medical care at all. And in the future, it's being discussed that, they will not get health coverage or stuff. I've heard stuff like that. And I'm like, this is body terrorism in its purest form. Yeah. And this is dehumanizing. And why is this even being discussed? It's only because of capitalism. They want to save more money. They want to blame more people. They want to lessen their own responsibility and then, just make someone the bad guy and then deny them services, which is...
Yeah, it happened in the UK where several counties, basically what they said was, we don't have enough money for healthcare, which is a whole other political thing because I think they're purposely defunding it or underfunding it so they can privatize it. But so they said, so in this area, we're just going to deny general surgeries to anyone who's fat.
How can
they weren't even saying it wasn't like because the surgeries don't help them as much or because it was just nope. We don't have enough money, so we've decided that you are the people who don't get medical care. But if you lose 10% of your body weight, then we'll give you the surgery. Like, how many ways does this not make sense? First of all, someone who loses 10% of their body weight is often still fat, right? So they're saying, if you came into this body weight, we wouldn't give you the surgery, but if you lose weight to this body weight, now you qualify?
To me, it's really saying is, fuck off.
Yeah. Yeah, we don't care if you live or die. It's not important to us. We're okay with you being in constant pain, with you not getting the medical care that you need because of the way that you look.
I just don't want to pay for it.
And it comes down to, look, you can pile on whatever stereotypes you want about fat people and what our behaviors are, what our health is, but it comes down to, based on the way you look, I am denying you medical care.
Exactly.
Period.
Exactly. It's so not right that I don't understand why this is even tolerated mass behavior.
Yeah.
Really. And I think the most powerful form of resistance to this ongoing bigotry and division that is currently going on, also on the political stage of the world, is that we focus, each and every one of us focuses on working towards self-acceptance, because I think a person who truly accepts themselves, not on a conditional level, like, yeah, if I stay skinny or if I do this or that, but truly accepts themselves, has no inclination towards disrespecting or dehumanizing other human beings.
Yeah.
Really do.
Yeah. Yeah, one of the exercises I do when I give talks sometimes is to say, like, who here has gotten a gift that they just didn't like? You know, kind of a crap gift. And everybody raises their hand. And I say, who took excellent care of that gift? Like, put it in a place of prominence to display it, dust it every day. And, you know, one or fewer people typically raise their hands because we don't take care of things that we hate, and we don't display, and we don't have pride in things that we hate. And that includes our bodies. And so I think that we shouldn't have to do it, and it shouldn't be so hard. But if we can create a culture where people have the opportunity to really love and appreciate their bodies, then we create a base for a really extraordinary world.
For a wonderful world. I mean, it would be possible. We all sit on this tiny little spot hurling through the universe, and we manage to fight each other and hate on each other and kill each other. And I don't know. The more I learn, the more upset I get, but also the more empowered in a way that I see I can affect the most change if I change myself, really.
Yeah.
And my own attitudes.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't do activism for what it will do for the world or other people, because I can't control what happens from my activism. I can't control the outcome. I do it because of who I want to be. And because of, you know, it's the best way to use the skill sets and the privileges that I have. And so, you know, I make the choice to do activism because it makes me feel better, and because it's something that I can do.
Yeah, let's be the change we want to see in the world. And in the meantime, hold each other's hands and support each other. We've talked for hours already, and it feels like we've only just scratched the surface, and we have been all over the place. Is there something on your mind that you want to talk about?
I just want to say, first of all, thank you again for the work that you're doing and for including me, and let people know that, like, there are resources out there. You know, if this interests you, dig into, you know, fat activism, dig into size diversity activism, dig into health at every size, and see, you know, what's out there.
Yeah. And first of all, they should read your blog. It's wonderful. Dances.
Thank you.
How long have you had it? Like 9 years already?
9 years. Yeah. Dances with Fat. It was, you know, I started it to talk about my journey as a fat person doing ballroom dancing, and then it kind of grew from there. I also have a page called kind of. I also have a page on there called Blogs I Love, and that will direct people to some other blogs and resources where they can start kind of digging more into the community. Yeah.
Danceswithfat.org is one of the places everybody must have seen in their lives, because it really it does change stuff. Yeah. I saw it like 2 years ago, and I would never have thought that I get the opportunity to talk to you. But now here we are. So that's proof that, you know, stuff is building. And the community is growing. That's the most positive thing we can end on, probably.
Yeah. Yeah, we're going to win. History is on our side. There's nothing to do but keep doing the work, and we're going to win.
Yeah. If you were to look back on your life, what would you like to be remembered for?
My goal in all of my activism is always to give people options. Because I'm not into telling anybody how to live. People can do whatever they want with their lives. But I want people to know that they don't have to hate their bodies, and they don't have to buy into the culture of thin as better. And I want people to know that if pursuing health is something that they want to do, that there are ways to do that outside of weight loss culture. And so I hope that people say, man, she opened my mind to a lot of options I didn't know I had. That would be, I think, a beautiful legacy.
It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. Thank you for taking your time, Ragen.
Thank you for having me so much.
This was today's dose of badassery from Life Unrestricted. Find the show notes with links to everything we mentioned in this episode over at lifeunrestricted.org. And if this show is making you feel good, awesome, make sure to subscribe and please let others feel good too. By leaving a 5-star review on iTunes, you'll help make this show more visible and therefore more accessible for others. You're the best. Thanks.